My name is Raoul Jacques DeLier, R-A-O-U-L, the first name, Jacques, J-A-C-Q-U-E-S, and no one can pronounce either of them, so as a young man, I morphed into Jacques, so I'm really known as Jacques DeLier. I'm the retired president and general manager of KWTV and Griffin Television here in Oklahoma City. I joined Channel 9 8 days after they went on the air, January the 8th, 1954. I graduated from college and went into the Air Force and got my wings in August of 1972. I was in prior to Pearl Harbor. I served 4 years in the old Army Air Corps. This was before the Air Force was founded. And I flew 65 combat missions and returned to the United States all in one piece. I was wounded on June the 13th, 1944, recovered nicely, and I joined Universal Pictures as a salesman. And because I was alive and well, and the war in Japan wasn't over yet, I skipped about 15 years of experience and landed in a job that normally would take about 15, 20 years before you arrived at the position they gave me because I was here. I rose pretty rapidly in the annals of Universal, becoming an executive, and was transferred around quite a bit in my schools. My children were in different schools. And on one trip to Oklahoma City, I called on Video Theaters, and they had purchased 12.5% of KWTV. And through them, I retired from Universal and joined Channel 9, and they didn't know what the hell to do with me. And I was put into national sales. And I was, at that particular time in the history of television, Oklahoma City was not a must-buy station. That is to say that, for instance, on the Ed Sullivan Show, Lincoln Mercury sponsored it, but they didn't necessarily have to pay for Oklahoma City. So it was my first job to go around and entice the local advertisers or the local retailers and or car dealers to try to get their home office to buy Oklahoma City. Well, I was fairly successful in that, and in about 6 months, I was named the national sales manager. And at that time, it was before the advent of any Nielsen or the American Research Bureau, and we had no way of measuring our audience. Well, when we went on the air, we went on old KOMA's local 300-foot radio station, and our large tower was built and completed in September of 1954. At that time, it was the world's tallest man-made structure, 300 feet higher than the Empire State Building in New York. So my pitch was, because we had such a tall tower and our signal went out further, necessarily we had to have more audience. So that was my pitch to all the few advertising agencies in New York at the time who sponsored and bought television time. So soon I became known as the man with the world's largest erection. Yes, I should go back and tell you that the call letters KWTV, I have alluded to the size of the height of the tower. The call letters stand for the world's tallest video. K means west of the Mississippi River, and the WTV obviously is world's tallest video. So we played on that for a while. At any rate, I was the national sales manager for a while, and then I was made the general sales manager, and had some success at that, hiring and firing and selling and worshiping at the feet of the networks. And soon I was made the general manager of the station. Our general manager was one Edgar T. Bell, who was the founder and one of the shareholders of the station. And at some time in his life, he became ill and couldn't work anymore, so they appointed me general manager. And I believe that was in 1959. So I was the general manager of Channel 9 and the president from 1959 to 1983 when I retired. Some of the things that happened were quite hilarious. In the early days of television, the networks didn't fill much time. Filling time meant that we were on the air a certain number of hours a day, and we had to program that time because the networks didn't, and that was the advent of syndicated films. We had one film starring Broderick Crawford, who was the son of Hedda Harper, who was the most famous print reporter in Hollywood. And at that time, before the advent of television, Mrs. Harper was able to cause the Hollywood people to be hired and fired and made money and less money. And so her son was the head of this syndicated show called Highway Patrol, I believe. And then we had another show starring Edmund O'Brien, and another one called Life with Elizabeth, with Betty White, who's still a personality to this day. I believe she's 92 or 3 years old, and it was the proper way to do business at the time. When we bought these syndicated shows, the Star made a personal appearance in Oklahoma City, that we would take them around to hospitals and orphanages, and they'd meet the people, and that was to tub thump the show and make it more popular for viewing. And we had one show, and I can't remember the name of it. It was starring Chill Wills, and we were. My wife and I were entertaining Mr. Wills at the Tower Club, which was at the basement of the old Skirvin Tower Hotel. And one of our famous men in Oklahoma City came over and said, "Can I have a drink with you?" So we introduced him to Chill Wills, and about 11 o'clock, Barbara and I, my wife, went home, leaving this gentleman and Chill Wills there drinking. Well, the next day, Evelyn Flemings, who was the clerk at the old Skirvin Tower Hotel, called me and said, "I've got something funny to tell you." She said, "This gentleman that you left with, Chill Wills, called me a while ago and said, 'What time does the Tower Club open?' And she says, 'Well, 11 o'clock, but why do you want to know?' And he says, 'I don't want to know when it opens. I want to know when it's closed. They locked me in here last night.'" Well, anyway, that was a few of the incidents we had when we had guest stars in Oklahoma City. I, of course, have many incidents like that. As the general manager of the station, of course, it fell on me to hire and fire, and our chief, when we first were on the air, our weather was left a lot to be desired. We had a fellow by the name of Bob French, who was our weatherman, our one and only weatherman. And he operated on, he had a chalk blackboard, and that's he drew in the fronts and the high pressure and everything in the backboard. And of course, we've gone so far now with Doppler radar and all kinds of radar and people on site and calling thunderstorms tornadoes and tornadoes thunderstorms. On Wednesday night, we had the Wednesday night Pabst Blue Ribbon fights, and they were on at 9 to 10 o'clock. And this one particular night was Sugar Ray Robinson fighting Jake LaMotta for the World Championship fight. And they finished the 18th round, and it was nearly all even. It was even to the eye, at least. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting home, and we go cut to Bob French, and he took 10 minutes in telling the audience why the weather alert was over. When we got back to the network, the fight was over, and the announcer was saying, and that's the Pabst Blue Ribbon fight for this week, and we'll see you next week. None of our viewers knew who won the World Championship fight. That was one of the funny things that happened. It wasn't so funny for me, but it was funny to a lot of the people in the audience that didn't get to watch the fight, the end of the fight, and see who won. Another funny incident that I can remember, back in the days of live commercials, we had an announcer by the name of Bob Holderby, and he was doing the Townley dairy commercials. And part of the pitch was that he had this bottle of milk, and he would take a drink and say, that's good. Well, he took the bottle of milk and poured it in the glass, and it went plop, 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 and the milk had curdled. And he raised it to his lip and said, that's good. And everybody thought that was pretty funny too. We couldn't stop it because that was before the days of videotape, when they videotaped all the commercials. We once had a weatherman named Harry Volkman who was very, very famous in this market. And Ralph Boland Oldsmobile had sponsored the weather on Channel 4 for several years. And being competitors, we were able to get the Ralph Boland to move his weathercast to Channel 9. And the first night we were on the air for Ralph Boland, Harry Volkman had gone down and bought a Volkswagen car. And he had spent the entire weathercast telling the folks how don't buy a large gas-guzzling car, buy a Volkswagen. They don't use much gas, and I recommend them. Well, about that time, my phone rang at home, and I said, yes, Ralph, I know what happened, and we'll let you out of the contract. So that was one of the things that we ran into. Another was we had weather cut-ins and news cut-ins in the network newscasts early in the morning at 25 minutes after the hour and 55 minutes after the hour. That is to say, 8:25 and 8:55. And Lola Hall would give the weather, and Jan Lovell was doing the news. And it became his habit to say, now here's Lola with the weather, and she'd give the weather. And a week or two had passed by, and he'd say, well, ladies, I think it's going to rain today, but Lola will be here with the weather. And another 2 or 3 weeks had passed by, and he said, well, Lola's going to give the weather, but I think it's going to be fine and hot and probably 90 degrees. And all of a sudden over the air come, that's right, you little son of a bitch, give it all away. And Lola's mic was hot and she didn't know it and thought she wasn't on the air. Well, in those days, if you said son of a bitch on the air, it was a big crime, as opposed to the way it's run now with the F word, every other word on the air, both networks and cable. And someone had complained to the Federal Communication Commission, and I had to go to Washington and explain to him that that was an error. That wasn't our common way we did business, and we'd never do it again. It was my recollection the way KWTV came to be at the time of at that particular time. The FCC had put a freeze on all TV stations, the application, till they sorted out and found out which station was interfering, which channel interfered with another. At any rate, there was an application available in Oklahoma City, and 3 groups were applying for the application. One being John Griffin and his brother-in-law Jimmy Lake. The other was a group of Oklahoma City businessmen and former Governor Turner, headed by Edgar T. Bell. And the third group was a group headed by Senator Robert Kerr. And at that time, as I understand it, if there were 3 applications for a license and 2 of them got together, then it was pretty automatically awarded to the 2 that got together. So Edgar T. Bell put together his group and the Griffin group, and therefore Channel 9 was awarded to the 2 groups, and Bob Kerr was out the window. And that was that way until finally the other group, headed by Edgar Bell, kept selling their shares to John, till Griffin finally owned 100% of Channel 9. When we first went on the air, Bruce Palmer was our news director, who had formerly been on WKY radio and was at that time the communications director for the State Department in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And we hired Bruce as the news director, and he hired Mark Weaver as the first on-the-air anchor. And Bob French was the weatherman, and that was the entire news department. So all our film was, all news film was shot with 16 mm cameras, and then returned to the station and developed in a film processor, which was a big barrel, required a space of about 40 feet long and about 20 feet wide to accommodate the processor. And our entire news, the numbers of people in our news department when we first signed on was about no more than 8 or 9. Now I think all the stations in Oklahoma City have at least well over 100, 150 people in the news department. Just to show you how important news has become, and has obviously become the cash cow of local television. Bruce was our news director for several years. We signed on the air with a small tower, 300-foot tower, because we were building at that time the world's largest man-made structure. And in September of 1954, we dedicated the tower and the new studios. And Johnny Carson, whom most of you have heard of, was the MC at the dedication of the tower and the studios. And after the dedication, we all prepared to the Tower Club, which seemed to be the Channel 9's favorite drinking spot in Oklahoma City, and celebrated the dedication there. As an aside to the building of the tower, when we got up to the 1,300-foot level, Vera Ellen, who was then a star in Hollywood and a dancer, visited us and was taken by elevator up the tower to the 1,300-foot level, and at that time did high kicks and splits at 1,300 feet. And of course that made all the national magazines and newspapers, and particularly the Hollywood film magazines. And so we were happy to have her, and she also, while she was here, visited some hospitals and orphanages and helped us promote the tower. And we were very grateful for that. Of the many people I hired at Channel 9, Gary England probably turned out to be the most important. Obviously, his tenure at Channel 9 was 44 years, and that just doesn't happen to each and every person that's gone to work at a TV station. So that speaks highly of Gary and his ability and his stick-to-itiveness at his work. I had told Gary when I hired him that being a TV weatherman was like walking a fence. If you tried too much comedy, you fell off one side. If you got too technical, you fell off the other. So it was a very tenuous thing to be a TV weatherman, and obviously Gary took that to heart and worked to the nth degree, and his tenuous nature and ability enabled him to work there for 44 years. And while we're talking about that, I want to be very grateful for John Griffin to have hired me and as in the managerial position for the number of years I was there, and risen to the president of Griffin Television. And I want to thank my son Michael, who was my good right-hand man for so many years while he was there at TV9. And I do want to thank all who ever helped me in any way to get ahead in this world.